Okay, so today we welcome at Global Citizenship Education Interview Series, Dr. Wiel Veugelers. Dr. Wiel Veugelers is Emeritus Professor of Education at the University for Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, the Netherlands. And since 2002, he has a chair as Professor of Education at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, in particular in the area of sense-giving and humanity and on humanist ethical education. His research and teaching is in the areas of citizenship education, moral development, teachers' pedagogical professionalism, educational change, networking between educational institutions, identity, and citizenship development, youth studies, and youth subcultures. He is editor and founder of the book series Moral Development and Citizenship Education of Sense Publishers. He is associate editor of the Journal of Moral Education and member of the editorial boards of the journals Compare, International Journal of Leadership in Education. He is coordinating several international academic networks, for example, the network Education for Democratic Intercultural Citizenship, in which 8 European universities work together in education and research. He's also involved with the network, International Networks for Democratic Education, in which worldwide 10 school university networks work together. So very, very welcome. It's a pleasure to speak with the Emeritus Professor Wiel Veugelers today. Thank you for joining the interview series.
Okay, I'm very honored to be a part of this interesting series. And let me say first my name in Dutch, because I know it's very difficult to pronounce for foreigners. My name is Wiel Veugelers.
Okay. I'm learning something new. Wiel Veugelers.
Veugelers, yeah.
Okay. Very difficult, but thank you. I'm learning something new here. Okay, so you are very welcome. I can tell that you have a long and deep experience involved with citizenship studies, global citizenship, values, ethics, all of these, philosophy of education, all of this is very, very interesting. And just before we started this video recording, I was mentioning to you that I got to read some of your publications related to values in education that really were a foundation for developing my research. And so this makes our conversation even more interesting.
Okay, good, thank you.
And I like to begin our conversation here with a straightforward question. And the question is, based on your experiences, both in research and teachings, what is global citizenship and what is global citizenship education, in your opinion?
We can talk for days about this question, but in fact, the word global only means that people are linked to each other, right. and globalization can have different ideological meanings. It can have different orientations, different ideological orientations. So if people are saying I'm favoring global citizenship, that doesn't mean anything. It only means that you are aware that people from different countries are in a certain way connected to each other. But the way they are connected, that should be emphasized.
Right.
So therefore, we should think about what different ideas about global citizenship are possible, and what ideas we see in theory and practice and in policy. So like with the national citizenship, I've always been interesting in to look to find out the research if there are different articulations of such a concept. That people have different ideas about the same concept.
Right.
You really can see that with global citizenship. And going back a little bit, that originally the concept of citizenship was only linked to the political level. But then happened what I called the deepening of the concept, that it's not only on the political level, but also on the social and the cultural level. So the concept of citizenship is about the kind of identity, the kind of person a society wants, and how education is working on that. So that's the deepening of the concept. But also you see what I call the broadening of the concept. Traditionally, it was a national orientation, citizenship, the link between the nation state and its inhabitants. But now it has extended to more regional ideas like the European citizenship, but also to the idea of global citizenship, the whole world. And on that level, you can see that it has become less a political term, because there is less political life in the global, formal political life in the global world than in the nation state. So on the level of global citizenship, I distinguish three different types of global citizenship. One, what I call an open global citizenship, and that means that people are open to other cultures, other ideas, open to the world. Is a quite liberal idea of global citizenship. And the second one, and that's quite dominant, in particular in theory, is a moral global citizenship. This idea about humanity responsible for the world. And the work of Martha Nussbaum, but also Kwame Appiah, they have been very influential in developing those ideas on moral citizenship. But you can also argue, and I follow in that people like Chantal Mouffe, that such a moral concept is not political enough. And we should add a political dimension to the moral. So therefore, I distinguish a third type of global citizenship, and that's what I call a socio-political global citizenship. And that's focusing on power relations, on inequality, and it's fighting for social justice. So these are three different orientations within the concept of global citizenship. And I think it's very helpful to de-articulate a concept like a global citizenship. Yeah. It's not a question of good or bad citizenship, but the question is what kind of citizenship.
Very interesting. Yes, I think what you're saying is really, really interesting, because it connects also to a lot of the work done in literature related to the several, if you will, ideological backing of theoretical orientations. We have more neoliberal orientation toward the notion of global citizenship, but also more humanistic, transformational, and even critical, supported, for example, by the work of Freire, of critical pedagogy, oriented toward fostering critical awareness. And I think the third typology is very, very interesting. Of course, the three typologies that you shared here with our viewers are all very interesting. The third typology seems the closest to the critical approach to global citizenship education. And so it's a very, very interesting. So this ties in a way to my next question, which is related to your work as a long-standing educator in the Netherlands. How would you locate and contextualize this theoretical framework that you share with our viewers into the work that you've been advancing in the Netherlands and worldwide, of course, because before video recording this interview, you were mentioning to me that you've been involved in several projects internationally. But I like to begin with your experiences as they connect to the Netherlands, because you are the first scholar from this country, and you have a really deep and rooted experience in the country.
Okay, good, interesting point. Originally, I'm very close connected to critical pedagogy. For example, I also was the first person who wrote about Henry Giroux in the Netherlands. So the Dutch educational journals. And I also was even had a position as Freire expert in an educational experiment. So I was very much oriented to critical pedagogy. And at that time, I was working at the University of Amsterdam. And at their university, they really wanted to have empirical research. And in particular, at that time in the 80s, so there was not so much empirical research in the area of critical pedagogy. It was more theoretical work, right. And I had to do empirical studies. So I also got interested in research on moral education. And also because, and we spoke about that before, I think moral values are everywhere. And in critical pedagogy is also a project of moral education. Even if most people from critical pedagogy don't consider them as moral educators. But as I always have been saying, progressive people and people from the left, they also have moral values. And they also want to work on moral education. So we shouldn't leave that area of moral education to more traditional people. We should be part of the debate, dialogue about moral education. So I became involved in moral education, and what I've been doing for the past 20 years, try to link moral education with citizenship education.
Right.
And Paulo Freire has an interesting expression, and when he's saying the pedagogical should be more political and the political should be more pedagogical. I'm rephrasing that and saying the moral should be more political and the political should be more moral.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so that's to show that we should combine the moral and the political.
Yeah,
because moral without political is often quite vague. And political about moral is often quite not focusing enough on the real content. So therefore, the connection of the moral and the political is very interesting.
And I think this ties with another question related to your role as a chair and professor of education at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, in particular in the area of sense-giving and humanity and on humanist ethical education. The ethical education aspect is very, very interesting to me. And I think it would be very interesting for our viewers as well to hear your experiences related to your role as a chair at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht.
Okay, yeah. So in 2002, I moved from the University of Amsterdam to the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht. And University of Humanistic Studies is a small university in the Netherlands, fully financed by the government and recognized by the government. And it's linked to the humanist movement in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, the humanism has the same position as a religion. Right. For example, in hospitals and in the army, you have priests that are counselors in the army and the hospital, but you also have humanist counselors.
I see.
So and in education, in public schools, students can choose for either religious education, Protestant or Catholic or Islam, or they can choose for humanist ethical education. And then they get lessons from people trained by our university in how people and how to help students to develop their own moral stance, their own view on the world. So so that's the humanism tradition in education in the Netherlands. And for me, it was very interesting because it gives the possibility to take a normative stance in education, to be very critical. And in particular, I've been working on how to link two central moral values, autonomy and social concern. I think those two moral values are important in humanist thinking, but I mean also in society in general. That people autonomy means that people can develop their own ideas, their own worldview. I think that's very important, very a basic human right, and very part of I think global citizenship education. But the second one is the social orientation. The
Right.
autonomy is oriented to the person, individual, and the social orientation is how you relate with others. And then you can use different words like care, like solidarity, like social justice. And I'm really in favor of very strong ways of social connection. And both values are very important for a society, and in particular, a humanist perspective on society. So I've been working in that field for the past 20 years.
Right, right. And in terms of the discussion we are having now, and also our brief discussion before this video recording, when I think of the word ethical, and of course in general the moral aspect and humanistic aspect of our discussion, this often relates to notion of values. And as I was mentioning to you, there is, of course, some discussion about values in academia in general, but not that much, in the sense that in general, I have the feeling that scholars are kind of running away from notion related to values. Again, this is my opinion. I just wanted to learn from you what you think about values in general, how they relate to education and the work you've been doing as a senior scholar.
I think moral values are everywhere. They are always there. They're always embedded in educational practices. So you cannot avoid them. And I think it's very good if people are aware of how they try to work with moral values. You shouldn't avoid moral values, but you should try to work in a reflective and dialogical way with moral values. And it's very important that people, also people from a more progressive point of view, are working in the field of moral education. So I think moral education should be studied from different moral, political, and ideological perspectives. And the critical perspective is very important. So I've always been trying to link the moral and the political. And I think when speaking about critical pedagogy, that's real about moral values.
I agree.
For the Journal of Moral Education, I also wrote once an article about Paulo Freire and moral education. And Paulo Freire refused to use the word moral education, because at that time, the dictatorship in Brazil, they were really speaking about moral education. So Paulo Freire wasn't speaking about moral education, but about ethics. So we should look how people are using words like moral and ethics.
Yeah, I think there is a sort of a super complexity around these notions. And in relation to this, I wanted to hear your opinion, and then we are going toward the end of the video interview. But just before that, I have a couple of more questions. One question is the following. The connection between values and another super complex word, which is the word curriculum. How do you see the connection between values and curriculum in education?
Yeah. In many school systems, people are afraid to include moral values in the curriculum. For example, the curriculum speaks about knowledge, they speak about skills, but they don't speak so much about attitudes. And attitudes are expressions of values. And I think it's values and attitudes are so important. I'm often saying that it's good that you have knowledge about democracy and that you have skills to participate actively in a democracy. But the most important thing is that you have an attitude that you want to be a democratic person, that you embed the moral values of democracy. So the moral values is very important.
Right.
But in most educational systems, we are afraid of assessing people on moral values. And I'm not saying that we should always assess moral values, but we should be aware of how education affects the development of moral values.
Right. Very interesting.
So you can say the moral values and the curriculum, at the same time, they are always there, but in a formal sense, they are the moral values are neglected.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a very crucial discussion here. We could talk about this for hours and hours, and I'm sure in the future we will have more opportunities to dig deeper into this. There is another question that all the guests that I invited here in my interview series on global citizenship education are asked. And the question is, how would you define global citizenship education by using three key words, three key elements, and why these three?
Okay, yeah. When you would have asked me this question about the national citizenship, I would say the first concept would be democracy. Because I think democracy is the most important element of citizenship education in a nation. And democracy then not only in a political sense, but also in the way Dewey was already speaking about democracy as a way of life. And how you live together with other people, that you give them space, that you try to get agreements with other people, that you respect other people, that you behave peacefully. So that's what we call the democratic way of life. On the level of global citizenship, it's very difficult to use the word democracy because there is not really a democracy on the world level. A guy from Singapore, an economist, a very difficult name, I don't know the name, but he once was saying, strange that the Americans, they always want to introduce democracy everywhere in the world, but they don't want to introduce democracy on the world level. I know. Then the Western world has only 1/5 of the votes. So the democracy is a complex notion on the world level, but the idea of a democratic way of life, that can be possible as part of global citizenship. And what I think, coming back to the different types of citizenship I was speaking, I think the question of social-political power relations is very important.
Right.
For global citizenship. I see, and recently I wrote an article in the journal Compare about that. I recently see that the concept of citizenship is becoming very cultural and not political. And I think also on the level of the global world, we should use the word we should use the notion of power relations.
Right.
And and the and the third concept deals with the concept of global itself. Global means only linking, and that we have the whole world together.
Right.
But the most important thing is, what is the ideological filling in, articulation of the global? And then moral concepts like humanity and responsibility for the whole world, for sustainability, that becomes very crucial.
Right.
So we should look at what ideas people have about the global. The global can be a very liberal way of open, and but also it can be a more moral for foundation of feeling responsibility.
Yeah.
And the political adds to it, that addressing power issues and try to change that.
So my understanding based on what you very interesting thoughts that you share right now is that democracy is one of the core elements that you identify in connection to global citizenship education. Do you have another couple of core elements that you like to share? I think, for example, one aspect that was very interesting, but I don't want to, suggest anything, because you're sharing on a broad spectrum of very, very interesting ideas. But the notion of autonomy was very interesting to me as well, and I was wondering whether you connect this to also the core element, or possible core element of global citizenship education.
Yeah. I sometimes say, in particular to my Asian colleagues and friends, that the Western idea of citizenship should be more social and less autonomous. And the Asian concept of citizenship should be more autonomous and maybe a little bit less social, and then social in the way of linking to the own group.
Right. Very interesting. That's right. Very interesting.
So of course, the notion of autonomy is very important. But in the Western world, and I think Netherlands is a strong example of it, sometimes the notion of autonomous become too important, and people get what a colleague of me called a too big ego.
Right.
And
Right.
they need so much space for themselves, so much. They are so much focusing on their own ideas, their own voice, and they should learn more that they are part of communities, part of the world, that they are a social being, that not only a person, a single person.
Right. So we have democracy, we have autonomy, very, very important element. What would be the third element then, in your opinion, another core element in our discussion on global citizenship education?
What exactly the social means, and then I think we should have more than only a caring orientation. There must really focusing on social justice, in diminishing inequality, and that should be really addressed on the world level.
So social justice, you see it as a core element related to our discussion. I fully agree with you. I think the notion of social justice really, really fits into this super complex discussion around notion of global citizenship, particularly seeing the growing inequalities that we have worldwide. And I think the COVID-19 situation will also increase this level of inequalities that we have. So democracy, autonomy, and social justice.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. And really, really thank you. This was very, very interesting. Of course, we could again speak for hours about all the elements that can be included in our discussion on global citizenship. But I want to really thank you for sort of putting together your thoughts into this conversation, and thank you for sharing your experiences and thoughts on global citizenship in our interview series here. Is there any prospective project, anything you like to mention in this video interview that could be of interest for our viewers? Anything you're working on or you like to focus on in the future? Feel free. There is a little bit of time for us to conclude this video interview, perhaps with anything you'd like to mention.
Oh yeah. I'm now working on a book in which I bring together all different articles that have been written before, with a new introduction, and in particular I want to write with each article why I at that time I wanted to write that article, and also say what kind of responses it had been, and how I think about the article now. So I'm trying to bring that together in a book, and also a kind of history of my own academic development. So I really enjoy working on that.
What will be the theme of the book? What will be the general theme?
The linking of the moral and the political.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I look forward to reading the book then.
Yeah, and maybe also, this was my last book, and it's open access with Braille.
Okay.
Everybody can download it for free.
Yes. I think I came across that and I downloaded, and it's a very, very interesting book. I read some of the introduction, and I look forward to reading all of it, because within your series, Professor Youssef Fagdid and I then will work on a book related to global citizenship education in the Global South. So I had an opportunity to read the precious work you're doing in the series, and it was very, very interesting. Okay, and again, let me challenge myself about pronunciation of your name, Wiel Veugelers.
Quite good.
So we really thank Emeritus Professor Wiel Veugelers. Try my best to use the correct Dutch pronunciation, and I'm sorry if I'm not perfect. And I really thank you. It was a real pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emiliano, for organizing this and also more activities. You're doing a great job. Okay,
Thank you.
I keep in touch.